Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. This is Rachelle Zanden. I am here with Corey Janoff today, like
Hello,
most of the time.
hello.
No guest today for you guys, but we're going to talk about something exciting. I think we're probably a little late in the game for this year, but lots of people at this point are making that big transition from training into that next stage of your career where you're looking for your first attending job or maybe just looking for a new job because it's that switch of the academic year, and a lot of places end up hiring over the summer, or maybe they hire in the spring and you start in the summer. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about different ways you can practice medicine, different kinds of jobs. We can't begin to really weigh in on all of the work-life balance stuff and how practicing medicine is different in different environments. You all know a lot about that, but we can talk about the financial benefits of different kinds of jobs. So we're going to weigh in on that a little bit today. There's a very common idea that like private practice pays more. But it's really important that when we're looking at different jobs, we're not taking into consideration only the salary or only the pay. We're also looking at benefits. We're also looking at really like your dollar per hour and all kinds of things like that. And one thing to note is that, like when we talk about, we're kind of phrasing this as academic medicine versus private practice, but really we're talking about like academic medicine, maybe more hospital based practices, something that likely you would qualify for PSLF versus like the private practice where you're working in a smaller group with like a bunch of other docs, but maybe you have an opportunity to be a partner at some point, really those smaller groups as a alternative. This can be pretty location dependent in some cities. Like if you work for an academic institution, you work for that institution. In other places, you actually work for a private group of doctors that like works at that hospital. So it all depends on the specific job that you're looking at. But whether you're looking at a job that's structured one way or another, like it all boils down to pay, benefits, hours you're working, and maybe like what other fringe benefits you might have access to, like whether you qualify for PSLF and things like that. So we're going to dive into some of those things right now.
Yes, we are. Um, Compensation. Usually that's one of the first things people care about. Well, I guess probably the first thing we should really consider is like what the actual job description. What are you responsible for doing? Like if it's truly academic, you're probably doing some research, maybe you have to do some teaching. Um, how is your time split, clinical versus research, that sort of thing, versus, if you're just, a clinician, only seeing patients, what type of procedures are you expected to do? What type of patients are you expected to see? Those types of things. So that's probably the first thing we should narrow down is, the job that, what's going to make us happy from just a job perspective, and then we can figure the pay side of it out next. Because really, no matter what you get paid, if you hate what you're doing, you're going to burn out pretty quick. Um, but the general understanding is that in private practice, you have the potential to make more money than in an academic setting or working for a hospital. Not always the case. Some hospitals have it pretty dialed in to where, just through economies of scale, they're so large they can get larger reimbursements from insurance companies, the volume of patients, the types of procedures they might have you do, generate higher RVUs. And you have some clients working, they're employed by hospitals making probably more than they could make if they were to do a private practice setting. But general rule of thumb, private groups, you have more potential for earnings than academics because it's a risk reward. You're essentially a business owner if you're a partner in the group, or if you're working for if you're employed by the practice. It's the partners want something for the additional risk of going out on their own and being business owners. It's got to be worth their while monetarily. Otherwise, why bother doing it? So
Mhm.
generally, you have the opportunity, not guaranteed, but opportunity to make more money in a private setting. And sometimes it could be drastic. If like a comparable job in a private group versus an academic setting is a $200,000 a year income difference, there's probably not a lot of benefits that could ultimately make up for that. And sure, maybe you get a little bit more in the terms of fringe benefits at the hospital-based position. Maybe the work-life balance is a little bit better. But yeah, it's going to be hard to make up that difference. But again, don't just think about pay and the annual salary. We do have to look at those other benefits, like how much are you required to work? What locations do you need to cover? How much call are you required to take? It all adds up. PTO, how much vacation time can you get? How much time off? It could really make a big difference in your satisfaction and total compensation. So,
Yeah. I mean,
um,
and you can really do a little bit of math to figure out how many hours you might actually work in one job, even per year, versus how many you're going to work in another job. So, if you have 10 weeks of PTO versus 6 weeks of PTO, that's a huge difference. That's 4 weeks that you're literally not working and still getting paid for. So your dollar per hour is kind of higher than you're thinking. Yeah. So I think it's important to look at the math when you're taking these things into consideration. And I think one other thing that can be very different in like a hospital based practice or an academic institution versus private practice is that you see guaranteed salaries a lot more in like larger institutions. And that shifts a lot of risk from you to the employer. So if you're not really breaking even for the hospital, you're not really making money for the hospital, you still have your guaranteed salary. And that's not going to change. Maybe they're not going to renew your contract. Like there's still some risk there, but you're going to make your salary. And then if you're working production based, like all of that risk is on you. You have to make money or else you're not going to make as much money as you expected to.
yeah, like in a private setting, I mean, you might, especially if you're just fresh out of training or in a new job, they might give you a guaranteed salary for the first year or two, but ultimately it's collection based. How much money are you bringing in? And that's what your total earnings will be based off of. And you got to be bringing in enough to cover your salary and even more so to cover the overhead expenses and whatnot associated with it. And obviously, the more you collect, the more you take home if it's structured appropriately, eat what you kill type of model,
Mm-hmm.
which is why in private practice you have the potential to make more, but not guaranteed. And if you're not, bringing in enough revenue, the practice is either going to let you go or restructure your contract to be like, hey, we can't pay you this much anymore because it's
Mm-hmm.
not profitable.
Yep. Sometimes those calculations are also pretty complicated. So I think if you are looking at a job like that, it can be important to, at least if the practice is large enough to say, hey, the last few folks that started here, like how much did they make in their first, like year one, year two, year three? And if you have a comparison, that can be really helpful. And then also think about it in terms of how much do you want to work? Because like, are you going to make average? It's like, do you want to work enough to make that average income? Or are you thinking that you kind of want to work less? Like, honestly, if you're production based, you're probably a person that wants to grind a little bit and work harder and make more money. But yeah, I think it's important to think about all of those things.
Yeah, if it's any type of production-based model, regardless of the setting, RVU-based, collection-based, whatever, definitely talk to some of the existing physicians, some of the ones that are in similar boat as you, maybe a couple years ahead, and get a idea of what their experience has been like, so you can kind of gauge where you stand. Whereas if you're in a truly academic setting, you're basically faculty, assistant professor, professor, etc. You kind of work your way up, and those incomes are pretty much set in stone. Like you know exactly what you're going to make at each level up the ladder. And the hospital will do inflation adjustments as time goes on, but there's not really a lot of negotiating wiggle room opportunity to earn more income. If you're in those faculty type roles, here's what the salary is, and sure, maybe you could do some additional work outside, like do some speaking or consulting on your own time, and bring in some extra money via a side hustle. But yeah, your salary is pretty much that. Here's what you're making to do research and teach, and maybe see some patients a couple days a week at our institution.
Mm-hmm. One other piece of pay that comes up is like incentive pay or like sign on bonuses, retention bonuses, stipends while you're in training. Like that, I've seen that come up lots of times, especially with private practices where they give you a little bit of money to just help you make things more comfortable while you're in training and while you're finishing up. And all of those are definitely things to consider as well, but they're temporary. So I wouldn't give them as much weight as like your salary and your pay potential if it's not going to be an ongoing thing. So if they're going to give you a retention bonus every single year, that's one thing. Like, yeah, sure, we can try to consider that for ongoing compensation. But if it's a one-time sign-on bonus, it's very like awesome. We should consider that, et cetera. But like, it's not going to be part of the picture forever.
And even though it's not going to be a forever thing, definitely you should be asking for it if it's not already offered to
Absolutely.
you. Like there's really no reason you shouldn't get some type of sign-on bonus, at the very least a moving allowance of, $10,000 minimum. Like, get something to cover that transition and come on board. Like if they really want you and they're offering to pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, like they can afford to throw you a couple bucks on the front end, to assist with that transition at the very least. But depending on the setting, it's definitely negotiable. Like you can ask for the moon. They can always tell you no. I just had a client recently tell me she was able to negotiate the highest sign-on bonus ever at her hospital. And it's a very large, well-known hospital system that all of you would probably recognize. And some of it just depends on what's the talent pool for,
Mm-hmm.
how many other doctors are there that can do your job. If you're a rare breed, then you could ask for more. If you're a dime a dozen, then it's going to be hard to get a lot, but at the very least, like I said, you could probably get at least that moving allowance negotiated in there.
Absolutely. Okay. So outside of pay, there are a lot of other benefits to consider and think about in a really like quantitative way because all of the other benefits that an employer offers you are real money like in your pocket or money that's not coming out of your pocket for something. So when we think about large academic institutions or other kinds of institutions versus some of these private practices, it can vary a lot. But a lot of times, larger employers can afford to offer better benefits. So, larger institutions, they may not be quite as concerned with overhead or they have economies of scale. They're buying benefits for so many more people that the benefits are less expensive for them so they can potentially afford better benefits. So those are lots of things that you want to be looking at. And there's a big long list that they can give you. When you are looking at a prospective employer, if you can get any sort of benefit summary from them, like a PDF or something like that, request it. If they won't give it to you, I don't like that. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Corey, but I've had lots of clients be like, they kind of gave me this like one pager of what it is, but like with very little detail. Like, sure, there's some life insurance, there's some disability insurance, but like nothing about what it looks like. And sometimes they're hesitant to provide more details, which I think can be ridiculous in some cases. Um, and I know that it's not, yeah, you
Yeah, I don't
took yourself
know,
off mute.
like there's no reason they shouldn't show you here's what the benefits are at our
Yeah.
employer. It's one thing if they don't want to tell you like the secrets to their, operations, but it's like, hey, here's
Mm-hmm.
what our health insurance is, here's all the
Yeah.
other like there's no reason why they can't share that information. So if they're not willing to, that might be a red flag.
Yeah.
Um, but most university hospitals, most major hospital systems out there, like you can just find their benefits online pretty easy. They post
Absolutely.
them on their website. Occasionally they're behind a login, like once you're employed, and depending on the how big it is, like they might have different benefits for different people. Like here's what the physicians get, here's what the administrative staff gets, or here's faculty versus whatever. So there might be different tiers of benefits, which can make it a little confusing if you're trying to search on your own online. But most of them, again, most of the hospitals post their benefits package online. You might have to dig around a little bit, but again, just ask, and they should be able to
Yeah.
send that to you, assuming they're interested in hiring you. They should have zero issue sharing their benefit summary. Now, benefits can change from year to year. There's nothing in the contract that states the employer can't change their mind on what benefits they're going to offer. They could change their health insurance, they could add benefits, remove benefits. Um, so those benefits aren't guaranteed, but again, it's a, free market out there. They got to attract people to work there, so they have to be competitive with their you know, alternative places that you could go work. So if they want to keep their employees happy, they'll need to ideally offer consistent benefits from year to year and then gradually
Or
add
pay you
versus
a
reduce.
bunch.
Yeah, or just pay you a lot. Like, hey, we don't have benefits, but you get a fat salary.
Right,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, those benefits really, there's not one. I mean, I would say health insurance is probably a pretty much a sure thing no matter where you go work, unless you're literally starting your own practice, in which case, get health insurance. But aside from that, the benefits package really can vary drastically.
hmm With health insurance, even there can be a difference in like how much your employer pays for and how much you pay for. So that's a good thing to ask. Like they may offer health insurance, but it may be that you're required to pay like a hefty portion of the premium. So that's one thing we want to look at is just how much is going to come out of your pocket or how much is going to come out of your paycheck. So insurance wise, like you want to look at health insurance, you want to look at disability insurance. Long-term disability is really the big one that we're thinking about here. So when you're looking at that, you want to know how much they offer, whether they pay for it. And then basically you can look at that and kind of see how much additional coverage you may need to buy through your individual policy, assuming you have one. And that's like real dollars, again, that will come out of your pocket in order to protect your income and kind of provide a coverage for that gap between what your employer offers and what you can get on your own. Life insurance is another one. So, how much do they offer you free of charge? Like that's a good thing to be thinking about. It's not a huge benefit necessarily, but it's something that they offer that they pay for sometimes. Um, I think retirement is a huge one. So when you're thinking about your retirement plan, you want to make sure you have one, first of all, like hopefully they have a 401k or a 403b or something like that set up. But then you want to look at what do the matching contributions look like? What do profit sharing contributions look like? Do they make a contribution even if you don't make a contribution, just an employer contribution? Is there any pension in the picture? And a pension is usually like a benefit that is sometimes employee funded, but if there's employer funded pensions, that's even better. And then what does that look like? How much does your employer put into that? How much benefit could you potentially qualify for? And then a really important thing to consider about all of these retirement plan benefits is what the vesting schedule is. So, how long do you have to work there before you're entitled to the benefits that your employer put into your retirement accounts? Is it 3 years before you get to take the 401k dollars that they put in there for you? Or is it like just a little percentage each year? Do you have to be there 5 years before you qualify for that full benefit amount? And if you're really unsure about the job, and you think there's a good chance you might leave in a couple years, like you may not get to take much of that with you at all.
Yeah, the retirement's a big one, and this is really where some employers can set themselves apart from others. It's easy to compare base salary across the board. It's just, apples to apples. What dollar amount is this place offering versus that place? But on the retirement side, so like let's just use the 401k and 403b model for simplicity because those are the most common. In 2023, when we're recording this, and when you're probably listening to it, maybe next year you'll listen or the year after for some late bloomers to the late adopters of the Financial Clarity for Doctors podcast. But so the maximum from your salary you can contribute as an employee is $22,500 this year. You can contribute an extra 60 or 7,500 if you're age 50 or older. So you can put in 22,000. The IRS says $66,000 can go into that account though. So this is again where some employers choose to max out the profit sharing and they'll put in the $43,500 difference for you to get up to that IRS limit. I have some clients at places where the employer puts the full 66,000 in. It's like, hey, we'll max out your allowable retirement for you. So if you're like comparing two jobs, one offers a base salary of 300,000 and the employer max funds the profit sharing for the retirement. Another place offers you 330,000, but they only put a 3% match into the retirement plan. So it's, really the job with the lower salary is actually giving you more money because your total compensation actually is 366. They're funding a significant amount of retirement for you, whereas job number two, yeah, does it the base salary is 30K higher, but they're only putting another, 9, 10,000 into the retirement plan for you.
Yep.
So that
And
that
those
can be.
dollars that go into the retirement plan, at least the employer contributions, they're not taxable right now.
Hmm.
Like when you take them out, they'll be taxed. But right now, it's like a very tax advantaged way to be, earning more income. Maybe you don't get it in your pocket right now, but future you gets it, which is great.
And how many retirement plans are there? Some employers offer multiple retirement plans. Like some hospital
Hmm.
systems will have three different retirement plans that can be added to. You got your 403B that you can contribute to. The employer puts a decent chunk into a 401A. And then they also have like a separate pension. Kaiser is well known for that. They've got the pension plus the employer contributions plus your contributions. Plus you can do additional after-tax dollars at some of their institutions. So like some places you could get, when you add it all up, like 6 figures a year going away for retirement. Same with the private practice. Do they have the 401k? Do they max fund the profit sharing? Maybe they also have a defined benefit or cash balance plan on top of that, or a non-qualified deferred compensation plan. I know I'm speaking another language to you right now, but it's all dollars that ultimately add up that you can reap the benefits of down the road in retirement, or when you leave that employer if you can take those dollars with you. So definitely worth you know considering that in the equation and not just looking at the base salary. How much are they funding for retirement for you? And then, how many plans do they offer that you can actually add your own money to in a tax favorable manner? Um,
Absolutely. Yep. There's a couple of other small things. So, like most employers offer some sort of CME, like reimbursement. Like that's real dollars that, like, if you have to do that anyway, if it doesn't have to come out of your pocket, that's nice. Malpractice, like usually you're covered by malpractice, but um, whether or not you have to purchase tail coverage can sometimes be a question, especially with smaller private practices. So, tail coverage basically is the cost to like have your insurance protect you after you leave an employer. So while you're there, you're protected. If you separate, like if any claims come up after you separate from employment, you may need to have tail coverage that basically protects you against those claims. Um, Most hospital systems, I don't know that I've ever heard of a client like leaving a hospital system and having to pay tail coverage, but private practices sometimes that can definitely come up. So that's worth knowing about, and it's also worth trying to quantify like how much will that cost if I do leave, just so you have at least a rough estimate of what that could be.
yeah, tail's an important one, especially depending on your specialty.
Mm-hmm.
It can be more costly than others if you leave. And just know what you're responsible for. And a lot of them have it like, in the contract, oh, if you leave within the first 3 years, if you leave in year one, you have to pay 100% of your tail premium. In year two, we'll split it 50-50. After year three, we'll cover the cost of tail. So, it's just what are you responsible for if you leave? Um, Student loans.
Last but not least, yeah, I think a lot of people when they're thinking about making this choice, they're like, what about my student loans? Which is a very valid question. Very valid. So, again, most academic institutions, a lot of hospital systems also qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So if you work for a qualifying employer for 10 years or make 120 payments while working for a qualifying employer, and then you do income-based repayments and all that kind of stuff, you can potentially have your loans forgiven at the end of that period of time, income tax free, which is big. So it whether or not this should be a big consideration for you kind of depends on a couple of things. One is how big is your loan balance? So the larger your loan balance, the more potential benefit you can get from PSLF if you're able to get the balance forgiven at the end of that 10 years. The other big thing that plays into that calculation is how many years you did in training. So if you're 7 years into training and you've already made 7 years of payments and you have $400,000 of student loans, you stand to have a big chunk of money forgiven if you can do 3 more years for a qualifying employer. So this can be fairly complicated in terms of the math. So, using that example of like 7 years, let's say, you start in practice, you're still going to make fairly minimal payments for that next year. And then you're probably going to have like larger payments the next couple of years, but you're not going to pay a lot of money. But it's worth it to try to like figure out exactly how much money you pay, how much gets forgiven, and try to compare that to how much more money you could make with a private employer if that's something that you want to pursue and want to look at. Um, let's just say like you do those 7 years of training, you end training with $400,000 in student loans, and let's say the balance is $300,000 at the time that it's forgiven. So $300,000 of debt wiped away, tax free. So you'd have to earn that $300,000 more over 3 years, which is about $100,000 per year. But that has to be like post-tax income from a private employer. So it's like $100,000 more per year in your pocket, which is, I mean, that's a pretty big pay differential. So if you can make that much more money in a private practice, like the student loans aren't a huge consideration. And the other thing is that sometimes you can negotiate with your employer. You can say, hey, I could turn around and work at this academic institution and have my loans forgiven. What can you do to help me pay off my student loans so that this is a more viable option for me? And definitely use that if it's something that you're dealing with and trying to plan for, because a lot of times private practices will be willing to give you additional money to help with student loans.
Yeah, it's definitely a big consideration. And for those of you listening who are still in med school, residency, make sure you're going on the one of the income driven payment plans, pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn, IBR. I think they're consolidating some of them here with some of the recent law changes. I'm not sure when that goes into effect though. But regardless, you want to make sure you're on income-based payments. I know the last 3 years have been a little confusing because no one's had to make any payments on their loans. But you want to make sure if you don't already have your federal loans as direct loans, do a direct loan consolidation to get them into direct loans and make income-driven payments while you're in training. Even if you're not sure you're going to pursue PSLF, you just want to tee it up so that that door is open for you if it makes sense when you're done with training. Because like Rachelle said, if you're in training for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you only have to work for a few more years at a qualifying institution to potentially get hundreds of thousands of dollars wiped off your balance sheet. That's going to save you thousands, like several $1,000s a month over however many years it would take to pay off those student loans. Like if you have $400,000 of student loans, you're going to need to pay upwards of $4,000 a month for a decade to get those paid off. And that's after tax money. So if you could just work for a few years at a hospital or some type of academic setting and then get that 400,000 kicked out of the way, all right, now go pursue whatever job you want to pursue. And again, maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe, go into private practice, building the practice up long term, better for your career ambitions and whatnot, and you can afford to pay off the student loan balances. But the larger that balance is, the more strongly you should be considering PSLF purely from a financial standpoint, which ultimately affects the rest of your life. But yeah, by the time you guys listen to this, this will come out probably in May. Student loans will probably resume payments here in September, potentially June, but I'm not holding my breath that Congress will come to an agreement on anything. So the payments are going to resume soon. You've been spoiled the last few years with no payments, but they're coming due. So we need to definitely take those into the consideration. And yeah, ask the employer if it's not PSLF eligible, even if it is PSLF eligible. Hey, I got all these student loans. Can you help throw me a bone and help me pay these off? Some places will offer you additional money to go towards your student loans. It may not be enough to cover the full payment, but at least it's something that you could
Yep.
potentially get there.
And they may also know about other programs that you can potentially qualify for or that you don't know about. So that's definitely worth asking any employer that you're working for. Like, what are my options to get some help with my student loans? Period. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously this is a complicated decision. It's not just about money, and we get that, but I do think that it's really important to understand all the details of the financial picture when you're weighing your options, because it is one of the big considerations. And it's just like, one of those things that we put in the pro con column, right? So I think it's really important just to know exactly what you're getting into when you're starting a new job. It's a big commitment. This is something you've worked a really long time for, and you want to make sure that you're being compensated fairly for your time, like for all the time that you spent in training, for as hard as you worked. Like, I think that's a really important piece of the picture.
And all that being said, odds are this won't be the last job you have. I would
True.
say anecdotally, and I'm guessing there's probably statistics that aren't too far off, but for fresh out of training doctors, I would say at least probably about half change employers within the first 3 years. Um, just from my personal experience working with people for about 15 years now, I would say, a good, half of them probably aren't happy with the first job they take, or they find a better opportunity, or an opportunity in the city they ultimately want to be in. And then even your second job probably not going to be your last. Like for whatever reason, you'll either find something different that's more appealing to you. A suitor will come along and offer you more money to go to a different location. um it's probably not, you're probably not going to be there for 30-40 years. Just statistically speaking, it's unlikely. So um yes, you want to definitely put a lot of thought and consideration into this, but at the end of the day, like if it's not the right decision for you after several years or whatever it is, like you can always move.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Don't ever feel like I mean, hopefully you don't feel like you're stuck. You always have options. I think that everyone listening here probably has a very desirable skill set. Like, the world needs more doctors. So you can find another spot if you're not happy where you're at, hopefully.
Yeah, may not be the perfect setting, but yeah, I've yet to come across a doctor, a licensed, credentialed doctor who couldn't find a job. May not be the
Hmm.
perfect job, but yeah, there's still a demand for doctors out there.
Well, let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.
Yep. See you next time.